And thanks for clicking the link to watch the video. I'm preparing this as the final section of the conflict resolution and alternative dispute resolution training. This is the part on negotiation skills. I'm preparing it for a particular company who I worked with today, but as I mentioned, I'd been intending to do it anyway because reasonably often we have a lot of discussion and case study examples and stuff in the session, which means we don't always have time to get through everything that we need to. A few other different things happened today, but I wanted to make sure that this content was available rather than rushing through it in 5 or 10 minutes in some of those situations where we need to, as well as making it available for the people from the training today. So, in terms of negotiation, our focus really should be on preparation. There's some strategies and approaches that I'll talk about now, which can be used to resolve issues or help shift things forward when they're stuck. But a lot of the opportunity to think through that strategic decision making happens before you go into the room. So, getting clear on the situation that you're dealing with and the factors that are involved. So, for me, especially when I'm dealing with a client or it's a significant contractor, it's not just a small issue like, you were meant to show up today and where were you? It's more like things like an ongoing working relationship, a contract discussion, payment schedules, or work that I'm requesting them to do or that they want me to do. Well, I suppose in all of those different situations, there's a different relationship that's there, which have these three elements of power, rights, and interests. And in a similar way to almost peeling an onion, as we start to unearth the different layers, it can give us information about what's going on, underneath the surface. So at the top level, and the most obvious, is different levels of power. You might be working with a client and there is a real imbalance of power at the moment. You're a new company, or there's not a lot of work going on, or there's a shortage, on the supply side of work, and there's lots of companies applying for tenders. Well, that would put you in a position of having less power. I can remember a company I worked with all going through this section, and they were doing a lot of work with the Department of Education. I think it might have been a private school actually, but anyway, they were talking about a tender application process, and there was a section to put in any sort of effectively variations or notes or amendments to the contract itself. And so they put in a few things like it was something like just pending material costs or something like that. And the school had to turn around and say no. Well, they did turn around and say no. Whether they had to or not, I guess that's a different question. And effectively, in that situation, the system was that if you put any notes or any variations, you just weren't in the running anymore. And the reason that the school and the client could do that in that case was because of that very high level of power. So sometimes there's just contextual factors that contribute to that. They do have more power than you. In some situations, though, there are opportunities to increase your level of power. So we're not just thinking about, the demand and supply way of thinking about it. If there's a lot of supply and you're selling something, you can't ask as much of a price. Well, that depends who you are and how you ask. Because power can also come from things like expert knowledge or the ability to reward or punish or having a position of authority. For example, I know a few construction companies have decided to specialize in something like asbestos removal, for example, or having easy access to a particular mechanical piece of equipment like a crane or a particular kind of trench digger or whatever it is. But if you've got that, then you can establish a more powerful position to negotiate from. If you can say, look, this is the kind of job where you'll need a crane several times throughout the project. It's not always easy to plan when, because we're also relying on weather and material and labor shortages. What that will mean if you decide to go with us is that we've got the equipment on hand. So firstly, you're not paying for it when you're not using it. And secondly, it means when it is needed, we can just get it quickly. So there's no delays. The progress of the project can effectively be a lot more efficient. So, we're not just comparing apples with apples, our quote compared to another. You could appeal to positions of authority or think about your ability to reward or punish the client. I know a lot of subbies end up getting more power by just refusing to do any more work until they're paid or whatever the issue is from the last job is resolved. So these can all be things that can influence levels of power. The other thing that you might think about is what's called a BATNA, BATNA. What BATNA stands for is best best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So if you walk away, if you don't make a deal with this person who you're negotiating with, where will that leave you? I'll sort of explain how that fits in the negotiation process in a few moments. The next level down, the next thing that you could consider are rights. Well, what rights, what are you entitled to? What are you obliged to do? So here we could think about things like the contract, legal rights, responsibilities that you have, but even things like socially accepted standards like reciprocity, for example. There's a lot of research about the word fair. Using the word fair often influences the other person to change their mind, and logically and rationally that doesn't make any sense, but again and again that's been found to be true in the research. People want to be seen to be fair, and almost giving the motivation that this is an opportunity to be fair here might go further than you think in a negotiation process. It could even be things like precedent or reciprocity, like, look, we've been generous before. I know we've had a few variations come through, and we've been happy to make those without any charge. I've just looked through the request that you've sent this morning and figured out what might be involved, and actually that's not something that we're going to be able to do without a cost. I'm still willing to be flexible, or given the fact that you've got a few of these things for free, I hope that it's okay with you. But please let me know any concerns or questions or additional information that would be helpful. So I'm basically saying, look, we helped you out last time. Can't you help us out now? And even when you're dealing with government clients or very large scale corporations, what I've noticed is that those kind of principles can still work. I mean, all of these things don't work in every situation, but it's like different tools that we can pull out of the toolkit, isn't it, when we're in the middle of a negotiation. The final thing that you would think about is interests. What's important for you and what's important for them? There's two real ways that you can use this. First, we can think about our own interests and get clear on those and communicate those. And second, we can think about the right questions or figure out the best ways to get information about the other party's interests. Now, here we could talk at the broad level about the client, like what's important to them. Government client, Department of Education needs a new COLA for the playground undercover area. So what's their interest? Well, it's keeping the kids safe from skin cancer or whatever. But what else is important? And I don't mean to sound blasé about that. That is important, protecting kids from skin cancer. But I mean, to be perfectly frank, it's probably not driving the decision-making process. So what are some interests that would be more connected to the decision-making? Timing. Maybe they need it to be done within school holidays, or it needs to be done with minimal interruption to the normal operation of the school. Safety, having the right equipment available would be helpful. What else would be important? Making sure that they don't need to do more work than is needed. A lot of the time when I'm doing training with government departments, what I've noticed is that if I can just hand it over to them and say, I've got the course fully written, here are some scenarios, I just need you to plug in this information here. And they're like, it's almost this sense of relief. And I often get asked back to do more training because they're busy and they don't want to do extra work. It's often situations where they're not applying for overtime extra pay, so they end up doing this work in the evenings or whatever to catch up. And if you can give them the idea that this is going to be a headache-free experience here, we communicate early, we communicate often, we send you updates, we're happy to give information, but at the same time, we don't need you to get involved day to day. We're happy to just take your general direction and run with it. These are the points where we'll check progress, make sure we're on the right track. Then that might mean for that person, there's a real assurance there. For someone else, it might not be about minimizing headaches. It might be minimizing budget. Maybe they're an up-and-coming person that wants a promotion. They're a client representative, and so for them, it just means it has to come in under budget. So that clause you've got about a possible $50,000, which could be instigated if this thing happens, that might actually be working against you. And if you remove that, then you'll be more likely to get the work. So I think about interests, not just the client, the organization that I'm dealing with, but even the individual decision maker. What's important to them? Is it certainty and knowing what to expect, minimizing risk, minimizing work and effort, getting to that really quality outcome at the end of the day, timing, communication. Maybe they just want, what would you say? Like they want the credit, they want the opportunity to stand up and cut the ribbon at the opening of the building. And if you can give them that opportunity and paint that image in their head, then that might work well to influence them. So we would think about the negotiation in two broad ways. There's two different approaches, I guess, that you might take. The first is what's called distributive negotiation. Here, it's basically like we think about a pie and we're going to get half each, or you'll get 2/3 and I'll get 1/3, whatever. So there's a cost of the light fittings in the new building, and the subby wants you guys to cover it. You've assumed that it's included within their quote. Well, there's that $20,000. And so if we think about the negotiation in the single issue in that distributive way, what it means is that we're left with these three options here: the soft bargaining, hard bargaining, and compromising. So we could basically be accommodating, give in and give the other person what they want, maintains the relationship, keeps them happy. We could be firm and hold the line and say, no, that should be included in your quote. We're not paying for that. Or we could compromise, kind of split the difference and meet in the middle. So, of course, if we're thinking about negotiation in this distributive way, then we would tend to use strategies like hiding information about our side of things. We don't want to show information that's going to make us look bad or weaken our position. We might anchor this idea of a strong first offer, and we can learn about the other side to exploit this knowledge. The other way to approach this would be what's called integrative negotiation, where we look at a collaborative win-win kind of approach. So both anchoring and the integrative negotiation can work. It's not that there's a right or wrong. It's really about picking the right approach depending on the situation that you're dealing with. If the subby's requesting the extra 20K for the lights, well, I suppose you do have the option of expanding the pie and thinking about other factors that are connected. Future work that you might be able to offer him, other things that he could do for you. Maybe there is a way you could pay the 20 grand and still get something that's important to you. Or maybe it's just not such a big deal. Just split the difference, offer him 10 and see if he'll accept it. Because it's not such a big deal if you upset him. You know, you don't have a lot of reliance on him in particular. So that might be a perfectly fine approach to take. When there's an ongoing relationship and we do want to get to that win-win though, we would think about negotiation in that integrative way. One of the tools that I use myself in negotiation, especially at the quote kind of stage where an inquiry comes in and they're wanting some bespoke kind of training course, and so we often give them a specific quote for that. We do have some training workshops that are just a set price, but others, we do just sort of calculate it and then come up with a number. And a lot of the time, whether it's a set price workshop or the quote, clients will come back and say, can we have a discount? Well, it's not a lot, but it does happen every now and then. It's often not-for-profits who say, we're not-for-profit, can you give us a discount? I think they probably just ask everyone for a discount in that way, and why not? I used to do it too when I was working in not-for-profits. Or they say our budget is this, or look, I don't know how that's going to go in terms of getting approved. Is there anything else you could do in terms of the overall cost? So they'll come back and say, we want a discount. Now, early on when I was running a business, I used to just think about it in that distributive way. And so I would say things like, well, yep, sure, look, I'm happy to do it for this price. How does that sound to you? Soft bargaining. Or I would take the hard bargaining approach and say, no, that's the price. Or, yeah, I appreciate where you're coming from. Actually, in this case, I can't lower it. You'd still be respectful, but I was effectively just holding the line. Or the third option is compromise, that meet in the middle. Look, I can't go down to that, but what about we meet in the middle, something like this or whatever. The bizarre thing about running training workshops is there's no cost of goods sold apart from your time and the effort and materials needed to prep the course. So in a way, when they ask for a discount, I'm always a bit curious because I'm thinking, well, why? What is it about that number that seems not correct to you? But of course, I'm trying to think logically, and they're probably operating more on an emotional level. So I used to just say, no discount, or yes, I'll do it, or let's meet in the middle. These days, I use an approach. It's called transparent negotiation. I guess it would fit in the integrative bucket. And it's basically being transparent about my own interests. So nowadays, when someone says, Simon, thanks for the quote, can we have a discount? Can you lower the price? It's too much. A competitor came in at this amount or whatever. Then I'll say, yeah, look, I mean, there's lots of reasons why you might need a lower price. So I appreciate where you're coming from. And then I'll usually try and empathize a bit more. Gosh, it's been a horrible 2 years, and I know you're probably experiencing rising costs yourself, or I know how difficult it can be in this context as a not-for-profit. You've probably got endless demand and a limited amount of funding. So I empathize with possible reasons why. That shows that relatedness that I talk about in de-escalation. Hopefully starts to create a bit of engagement as well. But then what I do is to say, look, there are some situations where we can lower the price. If you can pay the full invoice up front rather than the installments that we talked about, then I can give you a discount because cash flow is helpful for us. If we could hold the sessions later in the year, like September, October rather than June, then that would be easier for me because I'll have a number of staff that are trained up by then. If you don't need me to do the workshop myself, if I can have a different trainer do it, then I can lower the price. If we can hold it online, if you can organize the printing, then in those situations, I may be able to offer a discount. So you're almost just outlining, well, thanks for asking. You want it cheaper. Here's what I want. I want you to pay up front. I want a bigger bit of training. So it's not just a single workshop. I'd prefer to do it online rather than traveling. I'd prefer you to do the printing, whatever. I'd prefer me not to do it. Have a cheaper trainer for me do it. And I'm not being pushy. All I'm being is transparent and saying, look, this is what I need. And then the logical question you ask next is, so which of those do you think you have some flexibility around? So for a construction project, it might be we want a discount. Okay, well, look, there are some situations where we can give a discount. If the timeline that we're working to is more flexible, it means that we can more efficiently come and go in between other projects, so we could lower the price. If you're able to organize the shade cloth on the full site, it's pretty big, then we could lower the price by that amount. If you're thinking about other work and we could maybe help with that as well, then we could give you an overall discount on the different bits of the project. It'll be cheaper than getting someone else different to do the driveway and the concreting compared to someone else to doing the tiling or whatever. So it's almost like just thinking about, well, what do we actually want? Apart from money, what else is important to us? Giving a testimonial, letting us come through and take some photos. Imagine having a client talking about what a great experience it was working with you on the front page of your website and what a valuable thing that would be. So if you offer a residential homeowner getting you to build the home for them, like a 5K discount or something, like 5K is a lot to an individual, most people. And that valuable video for you might mean that you end up getting a lot more work than that as a result. Well, that would be the kind of situations where that transparent negotiation might work. But the crucial thing is that the other person is the decision maker. All I'm doing is laying out the things and then saying, which of those do you think you can work with? They might turn around and say, no, we want you, we've been recommended you specifically, we want it on site. There's no other stuff we want you to help us with. We can't pay, we've got a way that our accounts team operate. And then it's just like, okay, well, then I guess that's the price. And again, it's received better. Whereas if I just used to come out and say, no discounts, we don't do that. Don't you value your staff? Don't you want to pay for a great training workshop for them? It just never went anywhere and ended triggering that defensiveness and resistance. So I found that to be a really nice way of starting to introduce interests into the conversation. So we think about this thing called BATNA. It stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. PATNA is similar. It's possible alternative to a negotiated agreement. What I'm talking about there is what's going to happen to you if you don't reach a deal with this person. So you're in a negotiation, you're hiring someone, a trade or a whatever, and they've said, it's this much, and you're now thinking about, well, how can we deal with this? Well, the way that we can use this to prepare is thinking about the buyer and the seller and their different BATNAs. Where are they going to be if they don't make a deal here? On the top, we've got someone buying something. It could be a service or a product or whatever. Someone buying a car, a Facebook marketplace, someone hiring a concreter, and you want them to do it as cheaply as possible. You want to buy the car for half the market price, because why not? You'll save money, of course. But that number you're hoping, your best case scenario, is probably connected to something not to do with the other party. It's probably connected to you. It's probably something like, this will help us really, I don't know, set a new record of profit this quarter, or break even after the horrible few months that we've had, or it'll look good for me when I tell my boss this is the amount, or whatever. But that aspiration point for us is not usually connected to anything external. But we're willing to pay a bit more than that. It's not the best case scenario, but it's something we can live with. We might even be willing to pay more than that in some situations. But our reservation point, the point where we're not going to pay more than this, is connected to, well, what's my walk away option? Who else can I get to do this work? How much do they charge? If I know that there's a similar bricklayer or concrete or whatever, and they charge this and they're available, I mean, they're kind of annoying, but nevertheless they're okay at their work, then I'm not going to pay you double what they would do the work for, right? So for the buyer, their BATNA is connected to their reservation point, the top that they're willing to pay. And for the person selling, it's the opposite. It's the lowest that you'll accept. So the brickie probably wants to be paid 1.5 times his normal rate, because why not? You know, it'll help him with a new boat, or I don't know, make his wife look good, pay off the credit card debt, be an awesome holiday over to Bali. I don't know. Who knows what his aspiration is, but that's his best case scenario. Even if it's just, I want to push them as far as I can, like I want to win the negotiation. He might be willing to do the work for less. He might be willing to do it for less. But if he's got another company offering him more money, he's not going to do it for you for less. So for him, his reservation point is connected to his BATNA. So we can think about this before we go into a negotiation and estimate both these. We could take steps to improve our BATNA. Well, what's our plan B? If we had a larger panel of concreters that we use, then we're not as dependent on one or two operators in particular. We could hire them on staff. We could train up our own guys. Like, there are options that you could consider to improve your BATNA if you're coming across this. It's like hitting your head against a brick wall sometimes. And the option really is to change the game that you're playing if you can't change the rules of the game. And you could even also think about the right questions, or how you can get information about the other person's BATNA too. Like, how does this sit in terms of other jobs that you normally work on? For example, what would be the lowest that you've done in the past 12 months? I mean, they might not tell you, but sometimes people will disclose some of that kind of information. We should focus on negotiation. This is from the slide, so you don't need the handouts, so you don't need to remember this, but we would think about the situation. Who is involved? What are the issues? How urgent is this? Maybe pressure increases on the other party if we wait, so we don't need to hurry and deal with it quickly. Or maybe our position is getting worse, like the tradies refusing to finish the current project until we can resolve it. Are there other negotiations that depend on this one? What rights or fairness norms are there? And what issues or questions should be avoided? So that's a starting point. Where are we at the moment? What are we dealing with here? Then we would think about, well, what's the relationship? How important is this client? Is there a chance of future work? And you can even quantify this. Like, you'd say, well, I reckon there's a 20% chance of future work, and it's going to be, you know, in the $700,000 to $800,000 range. Who knows? But that's the best information that we have. But I can then calculate, well, 20% of 700K is this. And what would it be? 140? I should have done this ahead of time before recording a video. So if I can take a step that costs me less than 140K, that's going to increase the chances of getting more work with the other part, with that client, then I'll do it, right? I'll do this extra thing they're asking now that's worth 10K, because I know that there's effectively 140 in value that I don't want to miss out on. The staff that you're dealing with, internally your own staff, you really think about these things. Well, what's important to them? What's important to me? Does it matter if I upset them? Do I need to keep them happy? How much can they tolerate? What do they actually want? Maybe if I give them these 3 things, it would motivate them and they're happy, and the other 7 things aren't as important. Whereas if I tried to give them everything and keep them 100% happy, well, I'd end up burning out, or we can't afford it, or whatever else the problem is. What's your position? What's your overall goal? What are the issues? What's the importance of those issues? What's your BATNA? Is there anything you can do to shore up your BATNA? And what's your aspiration and reservation point? You'd consider their position and then start to develop your flexible strategy. Well, what would be the best approach to take here? And you can kind of see on the screen how these different bits and pieces fit together. So we've got desire to satisfy your own needs. If that's low, then you'd be more likely to accommodate. If it's high, of course, you'd be more likely to compete and be firm. How important is it to keep the client happy, or the subby, or whoever it is that you're dealing with? What are they going to do? If they're going to go in really hard line, well, then you might decide to accommodate if it's not that important to you. What's the level of trust? What's the level of time pressure? And what's the quality of your BATNA? These are all some of the different factors that you would consider. So then you'd sort of, I guess, put together a little bit of a plan, including the questions that you would ask, the way that you'll put forward your view, who will be involved, how you should structure the negotiation. And then it's often about just reviewing as you go. We should develop an effective plan, and that often means we've got a very good chance in the negotiation. But the other part that will be needed is continual reflection, making sure that you're on track. How is it affecting you emotionally? What do you need to do to manage your own frustration, annoyance, whatever? What would be likely to shift things for the other person? And then thinking about, well, what will I do if it works? What will I do if it doesn't work? What's the meet in the middle option look like? Almost having a contingency, even just at a very high level, means that you increase your capacity to be confident and direct and assertive in a negotiation, rather than accidentally giving in to something just because, well, in the moment you weren't sure what to do, you felt overwhelmed, or you just got so frustrated and annoyed at the other person that you've effectively told them to go jump, and maybe potentially not kept a few of the bridges that you might have been better off keeping, just because for you that cumulative effect of stress was getting to the point where it was like, enough is enough. So I hope that that's been... I'll just put that slide on the screen. As I was going through those different factors, this is what I was talking about. So desire to satisfy your own needs is low. I'd be more likely to accommodate. The slides in the handouts that we would have done in the training anyway, if you'd like to have a look at it. Sorry, I think I might have had my face up on the screen while I was talking about that. If you have any questions, you can shoot us an email. I'm happy to talk about it. Otherwise, I hope that it's been useful. All the best.